because I can't print anything out. I'm having to take my sermon notes directly from my iPad. So that means I'm depending upon the technology. So just pray that it will continue through the remainder of the sermon. Or maybe pray it won't, and I'll just wrap up quickly. Well, this sermon actually I had planned for 2 weeks ago when we had no power, and decided that day that we would do something a little different, given what we had just been through a couple of days before. And but this is the book of James, and we've been in the book of James for a few weeks now, off and on. And so we're kind of wrapping up our time in James, which maybe some of you are quite happy about. James says at one point in his writings that we should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. When I was thinking about what to say as a part of this message, those pesky words of James kept staring me in the face, and they kept pinching my conscience. Does your conscience ever get pinched? You know, the Bible can really get on your nerves some days. You know, my overall personality, I think I'm fair by saying this, is easygoing, cool and calm, most of the time, at least I've been told. But like others, I have my moments. And reading those words of James about being quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, I thought back to some of those moments in my life. Perhaps like many of you, most of those kind of moments for me have been shared with those whom I have the greatest emotional investment. There's a reason that in the marriage vows we vow till death do us part, not until we pluck each other's last nerve do us part. I thought back, though, to an incident a few years back when I was slow to listen and I was quick to speak and lightning speed to anger. I was less than 2 minutes into a conversation with a man who owned a parcel of old mill property that was right next door to Toxaway United Methodist Church, where I was serving and had been serving for several years. And about 2 minutes into my conversation with that man, which had been arranged for me to meet him by a friend of ours and a person very involved in our community. He thought it'd be good if I met this property owner next door. About 2 minutes into our conversation, I think we both determined our conversation would be over. And I walked away, and the person who set up the meeting between myself and this other man, with a somewhat shocked look on his face, he later told me, he said to the man, well, I've known Reverend Stutler for 15 years, and I've never known him to react to anyone in that way. I guess I let my passion for defending a neighborhood that I'd watched for 20 years be abused by slumlords and drug dealers and property owners like this man. I let that get the best of me. But in evaluating my reaction, I know it did nothing to further problem solve. And I let someone get under my skin to whom I should never have given that much power. Was I justified in my anger about the blighted condition of the neighborhood, perpetuated and continued by greed? I believe so, but did I follow James' advice? Definitely not. This morning, as we go back to the book of James, I'm not the first one who found James, the brother of Jesus, hard to deal with. In the history of Christianity, I think we've pointed this out, there were some heavy hitters who took issue with the book of James, even to the point that the great church reformer Martin Luther called the book an epistle of straw, and he tore it out of his Bible. Luther, whose great passion was that we are justified by faith, felt as if James put way too much emphasis upon works. What James calls the evidence of faith, saying faith without works is what? Is dead. I don't agree with Martin Luther that James is an epistle of straw. In fact, one of the reasons I believe the words of James are difficult to handle is that James takes faith to the streets, to where the rubber meets the road. You know, it's one thing to stand within the sanitized surroundings of the church sanctuary and sing, "Trust and obey. For there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey." But it's quite another thing to go to your workplace or out in the neighborhood on a Monday, to go maybe if it's your workplace to an overbearing boss or coworker. It's quite another thing to sit up at night waiting for a wayward child to finally come back home. Or it's quite another thing to head into the doctor's office after the call has come that the test results are back and the doctor needs to see you. It's one thing to sing so easily about trusting in Jesus when everyone around you is singing the same tune. But what about when you feel as if you're standing alone? It's in the middle of those sort of situations that faith comes to life. It's in the middle of life's every day, Monday through Saturday, every day, that faith is revealed in our lives as either hollow platitudes or a real-life foundation. You see, James lays out for us faith in Christ as a real-life foundation. He approaches the subject in a practical, common-sense manner. In his words, he says the place to start in establishing that foundation is the attitude with which we greet every new day of life. James writes at one point, every good and perfect gift that we experience in life comes from one source. And where's that from? God. From God above. You know, we like to pride ourselves sometimes in this country with this idea of the self-made man. Self-made man or woman. And we like to hail those who build businesses and fortunes as being the author of their own destiny. We build it ourselves. We'll fix it alone. Is often popular themes. But James reminds us that we, or I, did not build it. Whatever good fortune or asset it may be in our lives. James counters the idea of individuals claiming full credit for their own accomplishments or blessings. Rather, James says we all owe what we have and what we are and what we have become to a God who is richly gracious to us. For every good gift in our lives comes down from the Father of the heavenly lights. The foundation of a real life faith comes with the attitude with which we greet every day as being a gift from God above. From here, James moves into some rather specific and practical words of guidance about how to build this life of faith. He says, in his words, there's no lofty rhetoric here. There's no sophisticated theological musings. There's no complex formulas. James says the first step of faith is something your mother perhaps told you to do from the time you were a toddler. Listen. Listen. Before you speak, listen. Before you act, listen. Before you fly off the handle and get angry, listen. Now, there's no graduate school theories here. It's simple, practical, profound words. Be quick to listen. But does anybody really listen anymore? Really? Are you listening?
Yes.
There's a lot of talking going on these days, isn't there? From television to radio to the internet, words are flying at a rate and volume unheard of. Talk is everywhere we turn. Talk, whether it be in the form of the spoken word or the written word, is abundantly present at all times and all places. But back to my question. Does anybody really listen anymore? I wonder. There seems to be, both on a media level and an interpersonal level, a lot of talking at each other these days. But is anybody really listening? There's an old Turkish proverb that says, if speaking is silver, listening is gold. The theologian Paul Tillich once said, the first duty of love is to listen. And the command of Jesus himself, let anyone with ears to hear listen. What does it mean to listen? What is authentic listening? I came across several definitions of good listening, but this one captured me the most. To listen is to continually give up all expectation and to give our attention completely and freshly to what is before us. Not really knowing what we'll hear or what that will mean. In the practice of our days, to listen is to lean in softly with a willingness to be changed by what we hear. Let us not kid ourselves. Listening is not easy, though. Listening, like any worthwhile endeavor, is a skill to be developed. We don't teach listening in school. That's a shame, isn't it? Parents tell their children to listen, but do we teach our children what it means to be a good listener? Do we model for our children how to listen? Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. These are the marks of a Christian, says the brother of Jesus. But are those the qualities which characterize Christianity today? I recently came across this statistic that the fastest growing religious category in America. Do you know what religious group's growing the quickest? The nuns. And I'm not talking the N-U-Ns either. I'm talking the N-O-N-Es. The people who have decided to not claim or be part of any religious tradition are on the rise. Now, we know many of these folks. They're our neighbors. They're our co-workers. They're our family members. Is it that these people are selfish or heathen or simply not interested in matters of spiritual nature, of the spiritual nature? I don't think that's the case. There are many reasons people choose not to affiliate with any kind of organized religion, but I think as Christians we have to ask ourselves, what kind of image do we have? How are we portraying what faith in Christ is all about? I'm concerned that in too many cases Christianity has gotten this reputation for being an angry religion. When non-Christians see Christians making more noise about who God rejects than we do about how broad God's love is, then I think Christianity loses. When non-Christians see Christians more concerned about buildings or facilities or arguing over internal organizational issues than feeding hungry children or housing the homeless, then Christianity, I think, loses. What if instead, just what if Christians could be known around the world as listeners? As people who with compassion in our hearts really listen. When the question is asked, does anybody really listen anymore? What if it were the Christians who stepped up to say, I'm here, I'm listening? What if instead of talking at the world, we humbly lean forward to listen to the world? Maybe then what we have to say would have a chance to be heard. Who is it in our world that's longing to be heard? Whose voices are being ignored? I thought about that question. Amid all the world's noise, whose needs are being drowned out? Several of us here have participated over the last several years in an event called the Concert of Hope and Remembrance. It's a fundraiser for the Cancer Association of Anderson. It's a choir of largely, usually at least 100 people. And then there's always been, for the last several years anyway, a children's choir that sings also as a part of the concert. And several years back, when our granddaughter, Olivia, was singing in the children's choir, they sang this song that stuck with me, and I went back and looked up the words, entitled Prayer of the Children. The song is composed by Kurt Bester, and it was written at the height of the civil war in the former Yugoslavia between the Bosnians and the Serbs and the Croatians. And Mr. Bester had once lived there in that part of the world. We all know that there's lots of terrifying noise in the midst of war. I've never lived in a war zone, a literal war zone. I can't imagine really, but there's lots of terrifying noise if you've even watched reports of those, what happens in the places where war has broken out. And the voices most often not heard in the middle of all that kind of violence, the voices often not heard are the voices of the children. Do the children really want war, do you think? No. Do the children ask to have their homes destroyed by bombs, or their parents killed by bullets, or their own innocence stolen by terror? Kurt Bester said one night, feeling the hopelessness of the situation, he began channeling his feelings into a wordless melody. And then little by little he added words. Can you hear? Can you feel? He said, I started with those feelings, sensations that the children struggling to live in this difficult time, the feelings they might be feeling, Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian children all felt the same feelings of confusion and sadness. And it was for them that he said, I was writing this song. Listen to the words. Think about the children of the world, those far and near. Children in places where they are refugees. Children maybe from Central America whose parents have carried them to our borders to escape poverty and violence. Children of Africa orphaned by the plague of curable disease. Or even children of our neighborhoods right here in our own land of plenty, who go to bed at night hungry, or who are gunfire, children living within the shadows, perhaps even of this building. Listen to their voices. This is their prayer, the prayer of the children. Can you hear the prayer of the children? On bended knee in the shadow of an unknown room, empty eyes with no more tears to cry, turning heavenward toward the light, crying, Jesus, help me to see the morning light of one more day. But if I should die before I wake, I pray my soul to take. Can you feel the hearts of the children aching for home, for something of their very own, reaching hands with nothing to hold on to but hope for a better day, crying, Jesus, help me to feel the love again in my own land. But if unknown roads lead away from home, give me loving arms away from harm. Can you hear the voice of the children? Softly pleading for silence in a shattered world. Angry guns preach a gospel full of hate, blood of the innocent on their hands. Crying, Jesus, help me to feel the sun again upon my face. For when darkness clears, I know you're near, bringing peace again. Can you hear all the children's prayers? Can you hear the prayers of the children? Does anybody really listen anymore? I can't answer that for anybody but myself. But I also wondered maybe if we could commit ourselves here at South Main to be a place where we hear the prayers of the children, all of God's children, all ages, all backgrounds, all life situations. Can we be a church where we listen to one another? You know, one of the things I've also heard expressed sometimes among people who struggle, particularly those who live in homelessness, is that they feel invisible, and that the world just passes them by, no one takes the time to listen. Can we hear the prayers of the children? Can we be a church where we listen to voices often ignored, often silenced? So I hope you'll come by this week, knock on my door. I won't be here tomorrow or Tuesday, but come back on Wednesday. Share with me what's going on with you, if you like. I offer you a listening ear, but I just have only 2 ears. There's a lot of listening that needs to go on. So let me also say, if you'd like to just come hang out here, we have a good time most days. Offer your 2 listening ears to somebody who just needs to know that someone is hearing them. James, this will be our last Sunday, I think, in James for a while. But I thank him for reminding us to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. Let's pray together. In a world of so much noise, in a world with a lot of talking, but a lot of it being at each other, not to each other, we ask God for some silence this morning, that you would help us anew really listen for you to speak. Amen. Our closing hymn